Hands up if you agree she shouldn't be coming to these anymore. My mother-in-law said it the way you'd ask who wanted more sweet tea. Calm. Reasonable. She was standing at the head of the long cypress table on the screened porch, the ceiling fans turning slow above us, the May River going gold behind the marsh grass. 6 adults around that table, and one by one, their hands went up. My daughter saw it. She was 6. She'd come in from the dock with pluff mud on her shins, and she stopped in the doorway, holding a fistful of dried sea oats she'd picked for me, and she watched every hand rise into the air like a thing she'd remember her whole life. She didn't cry. She just walked over, pressed the sea oats into my palm, and whispered, "Mama, why won't anybody look at you?" I didn't have an answer. If I'd opened my mouth, I'd have come apart. So I smiled, took her hand, and walked out into the heat. What none of them knew, not one of those raised hands, was that I trace property for a living. I read chains of title. I notice when a name shows up where it shouldn't, and 6 days after that vote, every person at that table would wish they had voted the other way. Welcome back to Bernied Bridges Club, where quiet people finally tell the loud part. If you've ever been made to feel like a guest in a family you gave years to, stay with me. Drop a comment and subscribe. This one's for you. My name is Maren Ellison. I was 36 the summer my husband's family put my place to a vote. 10 months earlier, Daniel had died on the Beaufort Causeway in a fog so thick the deputies said he never saw the stalled trailer. He was a land surveyor, careful to the point of stubbornness, the kind of man who reshot a benchmark 3 times because 2 agreements weren't enough for him. He left at 5 a.m. for a job in the next county, and he didn't come home, and the rest of my life arranged itself around that one fact. I'm a title examiner for the county. I spend my days in the Register of Deeds, walking backward through other people's property. Who owned it? Who borrowed against it? Who signed it away, and whether they were allowed to? It is quiet, exact work. You learn to read a document for what it actually says instead of what everyone insists it means. We lived in a small tabby and clapboard house in Bluffton with a tin roof that sang when it rained. Our daughter Posey was 6, all knees and questions, in love with the family dog, a fat beagle named Marbles who lived out at the Vance place. Every night we read The Wind in the Willows, 1 chapter at a time, because Daniel used to do the toad voice, and Posey decided I had to keep doing it after he was gone. So I did. Badly. She didn't care. The Vance family had a place on the May River they called the Tabby House. Old oyster shell walls, a wraparound porch, a crooked dock where Daniel learned to throw a cast net as a boy. His father, Harlan, had built it with his own hands and held the whole family together with it. After Harlan passed, that house was the family. Every birthday, every Easter, every Sunday supper happened on that porch. Cora, my mother-in-law, presided over it like a throne room. I kept going to those suppers after Daniel died, because Posey needed her father's people, and because that crooked dock was the last place she could still feel him. I told myself I could survive a few hours of being tolerated. For her, I could survive almost anything. I should have read the signs the way I read a chain of title. I didn't. Grief makes you generous with explanations you'd never accept from a document. Looking back, the campaign to erase me ran for 4 months, and like any good fraud, it escalated. It started with a chair. 3 weeks after the funeral, I drove out for Sunday supper, and my seat at the table was gone. Daniel's chair sat empty beside Cora with a folded napkin on the plate, a place setting for a ghost. Mine had been moved to the far corner, between Posey's booster and the wall. The children's end. Nobody said a word about it. Cora passed the shrimp and asked my sister-in-law, Tessa, whether Posey might do better at the elementary school out near the Tabby house. "The one in town is fine," I said. Cora touched my wrist, gentle as a nurse. "Family decisions, dear. We'll sort it." On the drive home, there was a voicemail from Posey's actual school, confirming that a Mrs. Vance had called to ask about transfer paperwork for her granddaughter. Cora had called my child's school without telling me. Then came Tessa, Daniel's older sister, polished, certain, the one who ran the family checkbook and the family story in equal measure. She started arriving at my house unannounced, just grabbing Posey for ice cream. She'd have her buckled in before I had my shoes on. Once she kept her 4 hours and answered on my 6th call. Relax, Maren, she's with family. When I said I needed to know where my daughter was, Tessa sighed like I was the problem. You married in, she said. You didn't grow up in this. That sentence wasn't an insult. It was a position statement. So I did the thing I know how to do. I started a record. Dates, times, who said what, who was present, a note on my phone, the way you'd log an encumbrance on a parcel. I didn't have a plan. I had a habit. When you examine title for a living, you learn that the truth lives in the order things happened and the dates they're stamped with. You don't argue with a deed. You read it. There was a Saturday Wyatt came by, Daniel's younger brother, soft-spoken, always a little in his sister's shadow. He stood in my kitchen asking too many gentle questions. Had I gone through Daniel's truck yet? His work papers, his field files? His eyes kept drifting toward the carport where Daniel's truck still sat under a tarp. He left fast, and from my window I watched him stop halfway down the lane, phone to his ear, talking with both hands. I'd seen that exact posture across a closing table on a man about to learn a lien he forgot about had surfaced. I wrote it down. Wyatt is afraid of something in Daniel's papers. Then the talk started. At the farmer's market, 2 women from Cora's bridge club looked straight through me. A neighbor I'd helped move a fallen oak after the last storm crossed the lot to avoid me. The story had already been written, and in it I was the difficult one, the widow keeping a grandmother from her only grandchild. Cora didn't need a microphone. She had 30 years of standing in this town and a grief everyone wanted to comfort. The week before the vote, Cora called me, warm as Christmas. I want everyone together Sunday. It's been too long since we sat down proper. Bring Posey. I'll fry chicken. Cora didn't do warm without a reason, but Posey was already picking out her sandals to go see marbles. And I told myself, I was being paranoid. There were 8 cars in the lane when we got there. Sunday supper was usually 5. I learned later that the porch had been arranged like a courtroom. 2 women from the bridge club. So, it's fair and witnessed. Tessa, to Cora's right. Wyatt at the far end, studying his plate. After the food, Cora folded her napkin, set it beside her glass, and made eye contact with each person in turn. A thing she'd clearly practiced. Daniel was the heart of this family, she said. Since we lost him, things have been strained, and I think we all know why. She looked at me, almost kind. I'm not saying this to wound you, Maren, but I think, for everyone, we should decide whether you ought to keep coming to family events. She wanted it put to a vote, a show of hands. The girls are here as witnesses, so no one can say it wasn't fair. I looked at Wyatt, who was staring at a single spot, 6 inches from his fork. I looked at Tessa, whose jaw was set like a closed gate, and Cora raised her hand first, steady, certain, and the rest followed in a wave, the bridge club women last, their hands rising on borrowed conviction. That's when the screen door banged and Posey stood there with her sea oats, watching the hands. I did the arithmetic in 2 breaths. If I spoke, I'd scream. If I screamed, my daughter would be terrified, and Cora would file it away as proof I was unstable. So I stood, took my child's hand, and said the only thing I'd let myself say. I won't do this in front of her, Cora. The screen door clapped shut behind us. Nobody followed. I buckled Posey in, drove the marsh road home at exactly the speed limit, parked in my own driveway, and only then, engine off, dark, coming down over the water, did I let myself cry. One time. From the back seat, Posey reached up and held 2 of my fingers and didn't let go. If you've ever sat in a room while people decided whether you belonged, if you've ever driven home in silence because your voice would have shattered the windshield, Stay with me, because what I found in Daniel's truck 3 days later turned the whole thing over. Drop a comment if this one hits close to home. You are not alone. I'd been avoiding Daniel's truck the way you avoid the last page of a book you don't want to end. 3 days after the vote, I finally pulled back the tarp. His surveyor's field case was wedged behind the seat, scratched aluminum, his initials worn off the handle. Inside were the things I expected: a battered total station, a roll of flagging tape, a level. And underneath the foam tray, in a weatherproof sleeve, 3 things I did not expect: a plat of the Tabby House property, with one boundary highlighted in yellow, a certified copy of a quitclaim deed, and a folded note in his blocky surveyor's print. My stomach dropped the way it does when a date on a document is impossible, because I knew that deed type on site. A quitclaim is how you sign away an interest in land. Fast, quiet, no warranties. This one was dated 14 months before Daniel died. It transferred Harlan Vance's surviving interest in the Tabby House property out of the family estate, and the grantee, the person who received it, was Tessa. Daniel's note was short. He'd pulled the plat because of a neighbor's fence dispute, the way surveyors do, and gone down the chain of title out of habit, the way his wife would have. V, he wrote, his name for me. This isn't right. The signature on Pop's transfer is wrong. I'd know his hand anywhere, and that isn't it. Don't let them make you small to keep the peace on that porch. The peace was never real. I'll fix it Monday. There was no Monday. He died on a Friday. I sat on the cold concrete of the carport with the deed in my lap and felt the whole pattern click into a single line. The way 30 entries in a title abstract suddenly tell one story. Tessa hadn't wanted me out because I was difficult. She wanted me out because I am a title examiner married into a family with a forged deed sitting in the public record, and I was one records request away from finding it. Wyatt knew. That's what he was afraid of in Daniel's papers. Cora didn't know any of it. Tessa had loaded Cora's grief like a tool and let her swing it. I folded the note and put it, not in Daniel's case, but in my own nightstand. It was mine now. That night, after Posey fell asleep mid-chapter, I opened my laptop and started where I always start: the public record. A forged quitclaim doesn't stay hidden from someone who reads land records for a living. I just had to do it carefully and on my own turf. Monday, on my lunch break, I pulled the full chain of title on the Tabby House at the Register of Deeds, the building where I'd worked for 9 years. Certified copies, official stamps. The forged quitclaim was right there in book 1147, recorded and indexed, hiding in plain sight because no one in that family knew how to read it. But there was more. 3 pages later. After Tessa held title, she'd recorded a home equity line of credit against the property. $240,000. Borrowed against the house Harlan built, the house everyone believed was paid free and clear, the heart of the family, quietly mortgaged to the rafters. My friend Nadia, who works the recording counter, found me staring at the screen. "You look like you just found a body," she said. "Worse," I said. "A signature." I had Daniel's note. I had 2 decades of Harlan's actual signature on file at the same office, on a dozen older deeds. I laid them side by side. The quitclaim signature was close, a good forgery, but the capital H leaned the wrong way, and the notary's commission date didn't line up with anything. I photographed everything and made an appointment with a real estate attorney named Delia Frost, a small, unhurried woman with a corner office over the hardware store and reading glasses on a beaded chain. Delia listened for 20 minutes without interrupting. When I finished, she didn't look surprised. She looked like she'd seen it before. "Widows pushed out," she said. "More common than you'd think. The blood relatives decide you were always just visiting." She tapped the deed. "But this isn't a feelings problem, Maren. This is a forged conveyance and a fraudulently encumbered property. As Daniel's widow and the executor of his estate, his interest in this land is yours to protect. And a forged deed isn't a family squabble. It's a felony. I don't want to destroy them, I said. I want them to stop. Then we do it cleanly, Delia said. She drew up a single certified letter. It did 3 things. 1. It asserted my sole custodial authority over Posey and put them on notice that the unauthorized contact with her school would stop. 2. It documented the 4-month pattern of harassment. 3. And this was the floor giving way under Tessa. It stated that a forged quitclaim and an undisclosed lien had been identified in the public record concerning the Tabby house, that the matter implicated the estate, and that a forensic document examiner had been engaged. I read every line. I changed 2 sentences, not because they were wrong, but because they sounded angrier than I felt. I wanted it to sound like me, clear, level, final. The letter went out Tuesday. Certified mail, return receipt requested. While it was in transit, Cora made her last clumsy move. She called the county and asked in a voice full of concern whether someone under this much personal strain ought to be examining official records. The office told me about it the same afternoon and noted that the complaint was baseless. I added it to the log: date, time, the name of the clerk who called. Cora had tried to come for the job that fed my child. She didn't understand yet that I'd already moved. Nadia found me in the break room. "Are you going to fight back?" "I already did," I said. She just doesn't know it yet. Thursday at 1:47 in the afternoon, Delia's office called. Certified delivery confirmed. Cora Vance signed for it. I was eating a cold sandwich at my desk. Somewhere out on the May River, a woman I'd called family was opening an envelope with a law firm's name across the top. I knew the order she'd feel it in. First, offense. How dare she bring lawyers into this? Then, fear. Because the letter named specifics she thought no one would ever put in writing. 6 minutes later, my phone rang. Cora. I let it go. It rang again. The 3rd time, I answered. "What is this, Maren? What have you done?" "I set a boundary, Cora. In writing." "You sent a lawyer after your own family." "My attorney sent a letter outlining my rights and documenting what's in the public record. Every word of it is true." Silence, then her breath going thin. "We are having a family meeting Saturday. At the house. You will be there." "I'll be there," I said. 2 days. 2 days for Cora to read every line. 2 days for Wyatt to picture his sister's forgery in the official index. 2 days for Tessa to understand that the one person who could read that record was the person she'd voted off the porch. I found out later what happened at the Tabby house that Thursday night, after the letter landed. Cora called Tessa over and slid the letter across the cypress table. Tessa read her section, and the color drained out of her like a plug had been pulled. Wyatt came too, and when Cora asked him point blank if he'd known, he couldn't make his mouth work. Cora, who had buried her husband on that land, who believed the house was the one clean thing she had left of Harlan, turned to her daughter and asked the only question that mattered. "Did you sign your father's name?" And Tessa, who had an answer for everything, had nothing. If you've ever had to stand up in the very room where they tried to erase you, stay with me. Maren didn't shout. She didn't beg. She walked in with a folder and walked out with her name back. Hit subscribe so you don't miss how it lands. Saturday, 10 in the morning. I drove the marsh road south with the windows down. Cut hay and warm asphalt, and the green smell of the river coming in. I passed the church, the school, the diner where Daniel proposed in the corner booth with a ring he'd carried for 3 weeks. 3 cars in the lane this time. No bridge club, no witnesses, just whatever we were now. I sat 60 seconds in the driveway and touched the folder on the passenger seat. It held my rights, their record, and their lie. It weighed less than a pound, and it was the heaviest thing I'd ever carried. They were at the porch table. Same chairs, same arrangement as the night of the vote, except now there was a letter where the show of hands had been. Cora told me to sit. I didn't. I stood at the foot of the table, the spot they'd exiled me to, and set my folder down without opening it. Explain this, Cora said, holding up Delia's letter. There's nothing to explain, I said, in the even register I use for reading instructions to people who don't want to hear them. It states my rights as Posey's only parent. It documents 4 months of harassment, and it identifies a forged deed and a hidden lien in the public record. Harassment, Cora said. I'm her grandmother. I have rights. You have the right to ask a court for visitation. The court will weigh the seating you moved, the calls to her school, the people you sent to my door, and a vote you staged with witnesses to exile your son's widow. In this state, the surviving parent's judgment carries weight. I kept my voice flat. But that isn't even why I'm here. I opened the folder. I laid the certified copy of the quitclaim on the table, smooth, face up. 14 months before Daniel died, this deed transferred Harlan's interest in this house out of the estate. I set Harlan's real signatures beside it. That's his hand on 6 older deeds at the county. This one isn't his. The H leans wrong and the notary date is impossible. I laid down the 3rd page. And after this house came into Tessa's name, she borrowed $240,000 against it. The house everyone here thinks is paid for. The porch went the kind of quiet a room goes when a monitor flatlines and nobody wants to be the first to move. Cora picked up the deed. Her hand began to shake, not from weakness, from the kind of rage that starts in the bone. She looked at her daughter. You told me she was the problem, she said. You said we had to protect Posey from her. Was any of that true? Tessa's voice climbed. She doesn't understand this family. You sat at this table and asked me to vote my grandchild's mother off this porch, Cora said, because you stole your father's land and didn't want her to find it. Her voice cracked on the word father, not for me, for the realization that her grief, the most private thing she'd left, had been used as a lever by her own daughter. Wyatt finally spoke, barely above the fans. I didn't tell her to do the vote. I just said things might be easier if Maren weren't around so much. The room heard the distinction and refused it. He put his face in his hands. Tessa tried the old key in the old lock. You don't belong here, Maren. I held her eyes. I don't need to belong here, I said. I just need to protect the person who does. I closed the folder. I looked at each of them. Wyatt, then Tessa, then Cora, last. Daniel left me a note, I said. He'd already found this. He wrote that the piece on this porch was never real, and not to let any of you make me small to keep it. Cora flinched like I'd touched a burn. You said this was a family matter, Cora. You were right. And as the only parent Posey has left, I've settled it. I picked up my folder. If you want to see her, you contact me. Not her school, not the church, not my office. We schedule a visit, you show up on time, and you treat her mother with plain respect. That's the floor, not the ceiling. Do that, and Posey will know her grandmother, her uncle, this porch, that dog. Don't, and the next letter won't be a courtesy. It'll be filed at the courthouse, where I work. I walked to the screen door. Behind me, the river kept moving the way it always had. I didn't come to fight, I said, without turning around. I came to bury the version of this family that thought it could put me to a vote. The door clapped shut, and I drove home to pick up my daughter. The first week was silence, louder than anything Cora had ever said. Then it began to come apart their way, in pieces. Wyatt called within days. He'd known about the forgery for a year and sat on it, and he couldn't carry it anymore. He gave Delia a sworn statement. It cost Tessa the only witness who could have muddied the timeline. Tessa's forged deed went where forged deeds go. Delia filed to void the conveyance and restore the property to the estate. The lender froze the line of credit when the fraud surfaced. The notary's commission was pulled, and the county referred the signature to the solicitor's office. Tessa spent the autumn unwinding a $240,000 debt she'd taken against a house that was never hers to borrow against. She is not anymore the one who runs the family checkbook or the family story. Cora took the longest, 6 weeks of nothing. Then a note appeared in my mailbox. Hand-delivered, not mailed, which meant she'd driven the marsh road both ways without knocking. I was wrong about the vote, it said. I don't know how to undo it. I'd like to try. It wasn't a full apology. Her pride and her grief were still tangled in each other. But it was a hairline crack in a wall she'd spent a year building, and I'd rather have an honest crack than a polished lie. We started with coffee at the diner, the corner booth, the same one, and talked about nothing, which between us was suddenly everything. Posey taped a new drawing to the refrigerator that month. Me in the middle, too tall, holding what she said was my deed bag. Her father up on a cloud in his surveyor's vest, waving. And off to the right, smaller, her grandmother with Marbles the beagle at her feet. She hadn't erased her. She'd just put her in the right place. Here's what I learned, standing at the foot of that table. Family was never something you could deed away or settle with a show of hands. You don't get to vote a person out of the people who love them. Daniel spent his life proving where the lines really fall, and the last thing he taught me was that the truth is already recorded. You only have to be willing to go read it. If someone ever tried to make you a guest in your own family, tell me in the comments. Would you have sent the letter? Where are you watching from? If quiet people finally telling the loud part is your kind of story, subscribe and stay with me for the next one. You are not alone. I'll see you then.